So the other day when I went to work, I saw one of my coworkers, and the first thing he says to me is, "I thought of you this weekend, Jason." And I thought that he was going to follow that with, "I heard a really terrible punny joke or some sciencey joke." We've shared those sometimes. There were a number of things that he could have said that I would have anticipated. What I didn't anticipate was what he said, which is, I was listening to an episode of This American Life, and it detailed the story of a man who was too honest, who didn't know how to function in society, essentially, because he was raised by a family who was totally honest, just completely, totally honest about everything. All thoughts, feelings shared, constantly. So the story of this man, as relayed to me, was that he grew up and really couldn't function that well. He was terrible on dates. He didn't know what to say and what not to say. He was always either incredibly self-effacing or incredibly self-aggrandizing, because he was totally honest about his flaws as he saw them and his assets as he saw them. And this reminded my coworker of me. My first impulse was to say, "Yeah, I've heard of Asperger's," and it occurred to me for maybe the first time that my aversion to small talk, which I've talked about previously, and my aversion to not being totally honest, and my oversharing and philosophizing at the drop of a hat is kind of symptomatic of autism spectrum disorders. I don't mean in any way to belittle people who are on the autistic spectrum. I don't mean to imply that I am literally on the autistic spectrum. I don't think I could be diagnosed as maybe anywhere on the spectrum, but functionally I'm autistic. I listened this morning to that segment of the podcast, and I noticed a lot of similarities in my story and this man's. For instance, my mother was all about honesty. The worst thing you could do was lie to my mother. Any other transgression was a thing, and you would have to deal with those consequences. But if you lied to my mother, that was profoundly worse. Just never lie to my mother. And that's something that I inherited from her, not just in my behavior, but in my expectation of other people. I get very frustrated when people at work or in my personal life lie to me, try to deceive me, try to manipulate me. If you come to me honestly, whatever has happened, I will try to help you. I will do everything I can to help resolve whatever issue there is, if you're honest with me about it. But when I can tell that you're being manipulative, when I can tell or have any justified suspicion that you're lying to me to try and get me to behave in a certain way, it totally just sets me off. And I don't want to help you. I don't want to do whatever the right thing is. And I have to force myself to. I still try to be helpful even when someone is lying to me or trying to manipulate me. But it's very difficult. And like the man in the podcast, I do have rules. I especially found this man's rules interesting because there are some that hadn't occurred to me. Like, don't talk about the kind of person you are. I should maybe not tell someone that I'm on a date with that my family thinks I'm gonna die alone because I'm too uncompromising. That's not necessarily something that I should ever tell somebody that I'm dating. Maybe I'll start a podcast called This Quasi-Autistic Life. I'm totally not going to do that. Anyway, today is the second day of Vlog Every Day of April. Because it's the second day of April. And it's the second day that I've recorded. Which is great. I'm on a roll. This is wonderful. But that's it for now because I gotta go back to sleep.